have to date this back when Asians first came to America, and these Asians were more likely Chinese. And they came around in the 1850s to help and assist the enslaved black people to build the railroad at the time because they came here for economic opportunity just as well as any immigrant comes to America. Even during slavery, because we have to recall and remember that slavery didn't end until around 1865. And we understand that slavery actually, for most people, not for most, but for some people, didn't end to 1970s. I know you guys have been watching these movies that have been showing that black people were still in slavery up until the mid 1970s. Okay, I forgot to recall of the latest movie that came out, but nonetheless, black people were in slavery and didn't even know that they were free by law in the mid 1970s. There was these little small enclaves in some southern cities and around the eastern seaboard where they was kind of in the cut where they really didn't have access to roads or anything of that nature because they was way back on these plantations that it took a mile or two to actually reach the nearest main road. But nonetheless, when Asians first came here, there was more likely Chinese, and they was assisting enslaved black people to build the railroads. Now we're noticing a trend here. On one of my latest broadcasts, I stated that the new Negro or Hispanics, as they're making Asians, quote unquote, the model minorities. But this trend has been happening for quite some time. And when we look at this family, we see the rise of Asian Americans, and this is dated back to June of 2012. It states here the new edition of our 2012 report on Asian Americans provides data on 14 smaller Asian origin groups with population counts below 500,000 in the 2010 census, along with detailed data on the economic and demographics characteristics of adults in 9 of these groups. But it goes on to say that Asian Americans are the highest income, best educated, and fastest growing racial group in the United States of America. They are more satisfied, listen, they are more satisfied than the general public with their lives, finances, and the direction of the country, and they place more value than other Americans do on marriage, parenthood, hard work, and career success, according to comprehensive new nationwide survey by the Pew Research Center. Now, everyone knows that the Pew Research Center is a well-respected and reputable research facility. So they're going to take these things to heart. And this came out, this really didn't get that much light, but it needs to get so much light because they're not really importing Chinese with the friction and the differences and them part of the BRICS and them, quote unquote, supporting Russia in this war with Ukraine. The new model Asians are the East Indians, right? They're taking more, I won't say initially they're being provided more with the tech jobs and call jobs, call center jobs, things of that nature. But this information is very important because this was 2012. And as you can tell right here, it states that they're more happier with their lives here in America with the opportunities that America has provided with them, right? They have more values on marriage, parenthood, hard work, and career success. And if we want to go on through this whole article right here, we're going to notice that they are even being more imported than Hispanics legally, not illegally, legally. But there are still illegal Asians within the country. And that's one thing that the news media, the white dominant news media is not projecting. They're only projecting Hispanics and they're projecting Haitians more so of the illegals that are here in America. No, there are illegal Asians as well. Whether it be the drug trafficking ring or the sex trafficking ring or those who are flying to Mexico and then coming through America illegally, okay? But there's more information here for you guys to look over. It says here that Asians recently passed Hispanics as the largest group of new immigrants to the United States. It goes on to say that the educational credentials of these recent arrivals are striking. More than 6 in 10, 61% adults ages 25 to 64 who came from Asia in recent years have at least a bachelor's degree. This is double the share among the recent non-Asian arrivals. Okay, they're talking about Hispanics and Haitians. and almost surely makes the recent Asian arrivals the most highly educated cohort of immigrants in United States history. Okay, and this is all by design, family, because some of these come from well-established economies. Now they may have a high rate of poverty because their populations are so large. Now, with the exception of Korea and Japan, but when we're talking about the influx of East Indians who are becoming American citizens by way of H-1B1, all these ways we have to become legal citizens, green cards, etc., then we see the mass movement of how Asians are now overtaking Hispanics, and Hispanics are becoming the new Negro. What does that mean for us? That means that we're going to become fourth. Now, Hispanics, Asians, and whites already make more money than us. They already have a higher income than us. And I'm going to show you right here. This is, again, Pew Research Center here, family. And you states here, median household income, and this is in 2010, it has only gotten worse. U.S. population, that's an average, roughly $50,000. Asians, $66,000. Whites, $54,000. Hispanics, $40,000. And blacks, $33,000. Now, this is a one-off really quickly. When we hear people, black women, people within the community speak about they want these six-figure men, guess what? It's not that many out there. The numbers just don't compute. If you want a black man and you want six figures, just know the average amount that black people make in general is $33,000, okay? So why is this important? Because before I go any further, there's been a rumor, a scuttlebutt, some manipulation of Asians, Chinese Americans or Chinese Asians are the ones who built the railroad. And it's articles like this. It states here that in the 1850s, Chinese workers migrated to the United States, first to work in the gold mines, but also to take agricultural jobs and factory work, especially in the garment industry. Chinese immigrants were particularly instrumental in building railroads in the American West. And as Chinese laborers grew successful in the United States, a number of them became entrepreneurs in their own right. Now, a lot of them became owners and operators of some of the railroad companies that were spurring up in the American West. Now, as you see here, they say that they were instrumental. But who built the foundation of the railroad? That's one thing that, they use this trick language, they use these words in a very manipulative manner, or they leave certain things out, or they put certain things in to replace the wording. So you don't believe that black people built the foundation of the railroad. Well, it goes on to say here that American objections to Chinese immigration took many forms and generally stemmed from economic and cultural tensions, because a lot of the Chinese was coming over here doing better than the white Americans, okay? As well as ethnic discrimination. Most Chinese laborers who came to the United States did so in order to send money back to China to support their families there. At the same time, they also had to repay loans to Chinese merchants who paid their passage to America. What does this sound like? This sounds like any other immigrant that came to America. African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants, Hispanic immigrants, Haitian immigrants, Asian immigrants. When they come to America, they send money back home. So the money that they're making in America is not fueling the economy of America. That dollar is not being circulated in America. It's being circulated in their countries, which is going to help to build their country. Guess what, family? That explains the $32 trillion debt that America has. One of the reasons. I mean, there's so many variables to this, but I want you to hear and understand what I'm stating. Just like we're talking about how money being circulated in different communities, the Jewish community, the black community, the white community, the Hispanic communities. A lot of these people own and operate businesses, except black, own and operate businesses within their community that allows them to circulate the dollar. Now, we understand that back in the early 1900s, the Asians have done by the way of the political system, was allowed in the black community. And the reason why I say allowed is because black people for a very long time own and operate their houses and businesses within their community. Then all of a sudden, certain barriers came in place to prevent black people from owning and operating property within their own community. But they allowed Asians to come in. They allowed Vietnamese. They allowed Chinese. They allowed Koreans. They allowed Japanese to come in, buy up their property, and build businesses. And then we had to circulate our dollars within their community. They then took that money and sent that money back home to their respective Asian countries, or they then took that money and circulated within the Chinatowns, which we have one in almost every major city in America. Even in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, we have a Chinatown, right? And it's a corridor of approximately maybe 12, 15, maybe 20 blocks or so that owned and operated by the Chinese within America. Now, I'm not saying this is illegal or anything like this, but this is what has been allowed, okay? This is what has been allowed. Now, some of the laws that you may receive throughout the course of time, going back to the railroad, is that the Chinese are the one who's built the railroad. Black people didn't build no railroad. But you have to have people like the U.S. government to come out and shame themselves and do real news stories right here. Black Americans in the railroad. Now, if you see these lineup of gentlemen here, this guy right here to the left, he looks probably Italian. Yeah, he looks probably Italian. And there's another one. I think he's probably black or Islander, really tall guy here. But 99% of these gentlemen are black. Okay. Now, finally, someone told the truth, because it says here, enslaved people in the Western North Carolina Railroad, the first railroad track, listen, in the United States became active in the 1830s. The Chinese didn't come until the 1850s. Okay? They didn't come until the 1850s. So they came 20 years after. And it states here, and the Western North Carolina extension was running from Salisbury to Asheville by the late 1850s. So this was already being built before the Chinese even came, to debunk that so-called, lie that certain news structures and people who propel that, false information on the internet into black people. Like we don't know our own history. Yes, we do. And to go a little bit further with that, there's a lot of things that black inventors did for the railroad. And I highlighted some of these. Of course, a lot of you guys are familiar with these people like Elijah McCoy, okay? Because he could not become the engineer that he was, because he was a master mechanic and engineer, he had to become a fireman. Because back in the day, family, being a fireman wasn't a good job. They didn't have all the different equipment and apparatuses and flame retardant gear that they have today. So being a fireman wasn't like a skill up. It was a very, very dangerous job. And don't get me wrong, being a fireman today is still dangerous, but not as dangerous in the 18 and early 1900s. No, it was not, okay? So it states here that McCoy job to apply oil to the axles and bearings. This is for the railroad. And it could be a dangerous one as well, because he was not only a fireman, but an oilman who worked on the railroad to oil the certain parts of the railroad, so the traction and whatever they call the gears to keep the train moving. It says that McCoy walked alongside the train. He wondered, couldn't there be a better way to automate this process? You see that? You see the engineering and the epiphanies that we have, and we start to apply them to what we're doing. Because after you do something for a long while, you start to get creative ideas like, how can I make this better? But the difference is, family, a lot of you guys have those ideas and you're not acting on them. Oh, I don't have the money. Save $5 every paycheck, $10, until you can make a 3D version of whatever product or service you're trying to come up with. But be creative and apply that knowledge. Nonetheless, he states here, couldn't there be a better way to automate this process? That's when he puts his skill as a mechanical engineer to work, inventing a lubricating cup that would do just that, okay? It was no longer manual when he did those things. Everybody's familiar with Granville T. Woods, okay? 60 inventions. It states here that many of Woods' inventions were sold to large companies like GE, Westinghouse Air Brake Company, and American Bell Telephone. He was often referred to as a Black Edison. No, he's an intelligent black man. I'm not referring him to anybody who, quote unquote, came before him and really was an inventor, but more so a businessman. That's an argument for another day. He also was a fireman because these are the types of jobs that black men back in the day, hard labor and very, very dangerous jobs. These are the only jobs they could really get back in the 18 and early 1900s. Also, railroad devices included a steam boiler furnace in 1884 and an electromechanical brake in 1887. These are some of his inventions. In total, he invented more than a dozen devices to improve electric railway cars by controlling the flow of electricity. One of his most famous patents, though, was for his 1887 invention of the induction telegraph system, which allowed messages to be sent to and from moving electric trains. We have done so much for the railroads that has been outshined by the lie that the Chinese one who built the railroad system. They're the only ones. They're not putting in the groundwork 20 years prior to the Chinese coming over here, building the first railroad there on the eastern seaboard between North and South Carolina, and all the inventions that improved the railroad and the rail cars themselves. Like this gentleman here, Andrew Jackson Beard, patenting several rail car couplers, innovations between 87 and 1905. These inventions were born of tragedy because he lost the legs coupling cars together. But his inventions would help reduce that type of injury. It states here it allowed rail cars to be connected and disconnected remotely. Employees would no longer have to take the risk of standing between rail cars to couple and uncouple them. Then it goes to show you the innovation not only took his life, he was like, no, this has to change. Even in an oppressive, racial, discriminatory system, we were still improving the country during our time of oppression. During our time of oppression, and even though he had a job, he lost a leg doing this very same thing and still came out with an invention to not only help other railroad men, but also help enacted and spur federal safety regulations for the railroad. It states down here that Federal Safety Appliance Act, which made it unlawful to operate railroad cars that were not equipped with automatic couplers. Now, go to show you, he created the first automatic coupler, and then the U.S. government came and said, you know what? This was a great invention. This is very safe. Let's put in a safety act where no one can do it manually anymore. You're going to have to implement these automatic couplers. Goes on to show that Beard Automatic Coupler Company, which he later only sold for $50,000. Just think if he would have passed that down to his family and stayed within the family till this day. Because while this was a substantial sum back in the day, it was the royalties from his various patents that made him the first black millionaire in Jefferson County. Now, his family would probably have millions on millions if he kept it within his his ownership, essentially. Now, last but not least, when it comes to these black inventors, let's look at no other than Lewis Latimer. And back in 1874, Latimer co-patented an improved water closet for railroad cars with Charles W. Brown. This invention protected passengers from dust and debris coming up from the exposed tracks when using the water closet, making it both safer and more appealing to use, especially when those trains were coming into port. A lot of dust, debris, and dirt was shoot up at passengers before they were board, and people were getting injured from this. It states here that 2 years later, Alexander Graham Bell hired Latimer to draft patent drawings for his inventions of the telephone. Now, there's been a lot of controversy and, flat out arguments that Graham Bell created the first telephone. And for a long time, people have been saying that Lewis Latimer created the first telephone. Because here's the thing. If I have an idea, right, I think we can communicate using a device. Can you create that for me? So it's always kind of that gray area. Who first came out with the idea, but who actually invented it? Okay, because coming up with an idea versus someone invented are two different things, right? You may be the inspiration, the motivation, you may have the idea, but the mechanic, the engineering behind it is a lot harder than you just coming up with the idea. That's just my opinion, right? It states here an important role as these drawings can determine the success or failure of a patent application, but Bell received his patent in 1867. Now, that was just to debunk the whole railroad things, and I was just showing you how intricate black people were in building the foundation as well as improving the railroad, okay? That was kind of a halftime break. So let's move on to something that we see what's going on, and now we're starting to have these quote unquote sanctuary cities and black people within those sanctuary cities to start to speak out and against. It states here the immigrants paved the way for the gentrification of black neighborhoods. Now, we've been saying this for quite some time, even when it started with the Asians. Really, in the 1970s and 80s and early 90s, where they was just coming in droves to black communities, gentrifying those black communities, buying up the businesses in those black communities, even buying the apartment buildings in those black communities, right? It's a form of gentrification because anytime someone who owns your apartment building that's not of your same race, they could easily raise the rent for you to move to another community in order for you to move out. Like, you know what? If the rent is $700, let's raise it, let's double it, let's do $1,400. And during those certain times, $700 is very, very expensive, let alone $1,400. Look at certain areas in New York that was gentrified. I mean, just look around the country of how things rose significantly. I remember there's a area in Washington, D.C. called Berry Farms. Berry Farm was unfortunately notorious for high crime, high death, high murder. And investors came in and bought up the property and raised the rent or did not renew certain leases. And of course, this was a predominantly black neighborhood. And now Berry Farms and areas around it, condos. And who gentrified that neighborhood? White people. Because a lot of these black neighborhoods in these urban cities are very, very close to jobs. They're very, very close to transit, whether it be the bus or the subway. So you take a place like Berry Farms, you take some other places like Suitland Parkway, that a lot of neighborhoods, black neighborhoods that were there, have been gentrified and built up with single family homes, or they've been built with condos because they're closely to the Naval Yard, they're close to the Pentagon, Capitol, so on and so forth. So at one point in time, what white people used to do, they allowed black people to move into the cities for their servants and drivers and cleaners, so on and so forth, okay? Now, if you notice, white people have moved back to the suburbs, okay? They moved back to the suburbs because at first, white people were in the cities. Then they moved to the suburbs. And they allowed the black people, because it was in close proximity, because we didn't have cars. We needed public transportation, right? So they lowered the rents in the cities and raised the rents in the suburbs so black people couldn't move to the suburbs unless you were well-to-do. Now they've come in, gentrified these black neighborhoods by raising the rent, buying up the property, making the rent astronomical so you can't afford it. And white people have now regained the foothold into a lot of these so-called black neighborhoods, which are now white neighborhoods, because they're now closer to their jobs. How does this play a role? Now, it says here, a study shows Asian and Hispanic immigrants alter U.S. neighborhood demographics. Of course they do. Many think of gentrification today as wealthy. White millennials moving into low-income black neighborhoods and driving up housing costs. Yet a new study suggests that another group may play a role in the process: immigrants. Gentrification, in which affluent outside settlers and renovate rundown neighborhoods, generally decrease in white neighborhoods when immigrants from Asia and Latin America move in. The opposite is true in black neighborhoods, where rising immigrant numbers increase the odds as an area will be gentrified. All by design, family. Now, what's funny about this article here, this article is dated back from April 18, 2019. And even more so than that, this migration of gentrification has been occurring for quite some time now. But now is being also prevalent and in your face, where black people are now realizing we've made a mistake by voting Democrat. We understand that Republicans are not going to give us nothing. They're not going to save black people. But the party that comes to us the most, the party that we monolithically vote for, we have to say time out. We have to stop. We have to stop giving our power away by the way of the vote, voting for a party that continues to undermine us and systematically oppress us and disperse us. See, what I've noticed here in Texas, driving around in certain neighborhoods are predominantly East Indian. When East Indians come to America, they file under East Indians and they move to that East Indian neighborhood. Why? Not only protection of the cultural base, but also protection of an economic base, because within those East Indian communities and neighborhoods, they buy up the property and open up shops, would it be Indian food shops or fast food or convenience stores. It doesn't matter. They are now owning and operating these small enclaves, these small communities within their jurisdiction. And that's going to start to spread out in a political manner, meaning they're going to become aldermen within their communities. They're going to become councilmen within their communities. They're going to start to become senators for their communities, and they're going to start becoming congressmen for their communities. I'm not hating against the East Indians. I know exactly what they're doing. But here's the thing, family. We have to see it as real and clear as everyone else. If we continue to vote for a party that does everything that is in opposition of our well-being, then where do you think black Americans will be in the next 10 years? Not the next 30, not the next 50, but in the next 10 years. A lot of people are stating that this is the last election that black Americans have to get it right. And what am I stating? I'm stating that if we're not voting for something, we're not voting for reparations, right? And the reparations argument, listen, there's really no argument. They enslaved our people. We built this country. There's a debt to be owed. Just as well as you paid off everybody else, especially the Native Americans. And I'm not hating against any other group, but we have to point out those examples of the American government giving reparations each and every year. Each and every year. I don't want to be, we can easily compare it, the Japanese, they got there when they was in these camps, they got, a check for $20,000, whatever the case may be. And during that time, that was a lot of money. But the one group that we should be, in my opinion, directly compared to are the Native Americans. Are the Native Americans. I mean, through the way of the Indian Bureau of Affairs, they receive reparations each and every year. And you don't hear black political pundits, right? You don't see them out there just buck dancing for daddy. They just out there stating, why would we need reparations? Why do we need this, that, and the other? Because other groups before us have and still receiving reparations. And the Native Americans didn't build the country. You essentially took their land. We built the countries, our ancestors. So a lot of people are like, you guys want reparations and you're not the ones who went through enslavement. Okay, then what about the Native Americans? See, family, anytime someone try to make an argument with you, just say, what about the Native Americans? What about the Native Americans? They're still receiving billions of dollars a year from the federal government. But anyway, I digress because that's an easy argument, okay? Let me move down here. It states here, changing the ethno-racial composition might make neighborhoods seem more amenable for white people to move in. They're more agreeable, right? Wealthy and middle-class whites fled the nation's cities for racially homogenous suburbs in 1950 and 1960s, meaning they wanted to go to places of people that look like them. That's what they wanted. They wanted to go to places in neighborhoods of people that look like them. That's what that's about, okay? It states here that the research underlines that gentrification is a much more complicated phenomenon than a white hipster moving into a black neighborhood. Okay. Direct Hydra suggests immigration trends may not be a main driver of gentrification. Instead, he wondered if all people, including blacks, whites, and recent immigrants from Asia and Latin America, are simply following new jobs that happen to be located near historical black neighborhoods. So the question for that article, that one portion there for me is, every urban neighborhood in a city, every city neighborhood is black? No, it isn't. There's white neighborhoods that's within city limits. There's Hispanic neighborhoods within city limits. But when you deliberately drop off or push or drive or motivate people to a certain demographic, a black demographic neighborhood, that's gentrification. So a lot of times when you read this, you have to read this very simple, but on a complex level, meaning look at it 2 or 3 levels deep. Very important. Now, when we look at these so-called sanctuary cities, okay, they have a large map, right, of all these different sanctuary cities. And I want you to point out something here. I want you to point out particular states and or cities. When I look at predominantly white states, I don't see that they're sanctuaries, right? That do not have large population of black people. They're not sanctuary cities or states, right? Like Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, only certain parts of Nevada, Utah, nothing sanctuary, right? Texas, nothing sanctuary. Florida, Georgia, well, of course, the black enclaves in Georgia. Alabama, none. Tennessee, one small place here. Kentucky, Missouri, Wisconsin. So as we look at this, the sanctuaries that was quote unquote labeled and directed by the Democrats are predominantly black cities or states that has a high population of black people. Have you noticed that even though Texas has large population of black people, either being the Dallas or Houston area, majority of Texas is white and Hispanic. And Governor Abbott, he's not going for that. They're not allowing, just as well, Moron to Satan, DeSantis, whatever his name is, right? He's not going for that. This is definitely changing the very nuances of government. And that's the big thing here. The reason why I think a lot of these Republican governors are not allowing their states to be sanctuary cities is because they see what Democrats are doing. It's very plain, family. What they're doing is they're creating a new voter base by illegal immigration, thus making those illegals legal. Very simple. Because they notice that they can no longer, as this last election, even though 87% of black people voted for Joe Biden, they can see a certain decline because it used to be like around 90%. So this has been a ploy for the past 20 years, believe it or not. And these so-called sanctuary cities, look at this, family. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts. I want you to look, name some of the big cities that have a large population of black people in it, okay? California, LA, Colorado, Denver, Connecticut, I don't know who's there. Illinois, Chicago, Massachusetts, Boston, New Jersey, Newark, New Mexico, had no idea. New York, in all the different barrels. Oregon, Salem, Vermont, Washington, Seattle, and Tacoma. So when we look at a lot of these different states that have these sanctuary cities, they have large populations of black people. Now, what I'm applauding is those black people in our South Chicago area standing up against illegal immigrant oppression. I'm not stating that the illegal immigrants are oppressing black people. This is the way by the Democratic government. By the way, the Democratic government using people, okay, using people to oppress another by the way of gentrification and using up their resources in order to push them out or degrade them even more. Now, a lot of people, of course, oh, you know, they would have stayed in Texas. And well, when you have governors as Governor Ron DeSantis as well as Governor Abbott, and they state that we don't have secure borders, and we've been asking for federal funding. And now I'm no Republican, I'm no Democrat, I'm no independent, okay? I'm just black. I'm just black today. But nonetheless, when you look at these things, if you're not going to give us the proper funding to secure the border of America on the southern hemisphere, right, which Florida and Texas is on, they're on the border, whether it be Cuban illegal immigrants coming by the way of boat and Haitian immigrants coming by the way of boat to go through Florida and or Texas, and as well all the South American countries by the way of these 10,000 people caravans coming to the borders of Texas and entering illegal. I understand if you're not giving the proper funding for these people who are asylum seekers to come through legal matters, legal ways, I'm going to ship them to cities that are sanctuary cities. We're not going to deal with illegal immigration here in Texas. We're not going to deal with illegal immigration here in Florida. See, I don't agree with a lot of the rhetoric that Ron DeSantis, Governor Abbott does that is anti-Black. Of course not. But I do agree with some of their illegal immigration policies. I will say that. But maybe you need to hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Maybe you need to hear from these neighborhoods in Chicago, how they came
Cheryl,
out
tonight the city of Chicago has not said if
this.
there are plans to open what they call a respite center in the former shuttered South Shore High School have been finalized, but people who live in that neighborhood made it very clear how they feel.
For city leaders who came looking for a conversation over opening the doors of a shuttered South Shore High School to migrants.
What's important
Okay, let me see
is
if I
that
can
we
clear
really
this up.
establish that this is a humanitarian crisis, and we're here.
South Shore residents responded with resounding rejection.
While this crisis may constitute an emergency for the city of Chicago, it does not constitute an emergency for the South Shore community.
Incoming migrants have overwhelmed district police stations by the hundreds.
So
It's
family,
my turn.
These Chicago residents are speaking out and against these illegal immigrants being sheltered within their neighborhood because they're using resources within those neighborhoods that when these citizens spoke out against it, they would now fund some of these same facilities that they're now sheltering these illegal immigrants in. Fair use, fair
It's
use.
my turn. Hello.
But city leaders could barely eke out a word of the details about a proposed
All right,
respite
family, I'm
center
having a lot
at
of slowdown here. But here's a school, the South Shore, Southside High School, that they're going to start housing these illegal immigrants in.
former South Shore High School.
When it comes to the total number of people at South Shore at any given point in time, it is fluid. We'd start with 250, 500.
How could you do that without consulting us?
I am concerned with safety in the area.
The Chicago Police Department will put 24/7.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
24/7.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So she gets up there and say, oh, they're going to put police officers around the school 24/7. It doesn't matter. If you notice what the second to last lady stated, she said, how can you do this? She at least had to be in her 70s or 80s. How can you do this without consulting us? Well, unfortunately, they have never consulted Black people. They have never consulted Black people or how they decimate Black communities. Did the CIA allegedly consult Black people before they trifled our neighborhoods with crack cocaine? Did they consult the Black community? No. This is total destruction of Black communities. This has been going on ever since our family, our ancestors have been released from slavery, have been let go from slavery. This has been happening. You've heard of all the black towns that were sunken and drowned because they wanted lakes. You've heard about all the redlining, how they put highways and freeways and interstates through black community, bringing more crime, more traffic, more congestion to black neighborhoods. Now we got gentrification. Now we got illegal immigrants moving into the neighborhood. Family, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. We can't keep continuing to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And this is a political matter and a humanity matter. But first, political. Some of these same people are going to go out and vote Democrat. Unfortunately, some of these same people who are there fighting against it, they're going to go out and vote Democrat because they have been brainwashed to vote Democrat for whatever reason, by their parents, or by current way of today, of people giving them empty promises and yielding no results. How many times you going to vote thinking that things are going to be better? And they have not been. I want you to think about the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden being in the presidency. Yeah, you're probably like, Joe Biden is more presidential when it comes to international affairs because he speaks a little bit better than Trump. But family, the presidency, the nation is not less racist because Joe Biden stepped into office. Black people are still getting killed by race soldiers with impunity, with immunity. So does it matter? I'm not saying go out and vote for Trump. I'm not stating that. If there's nothing on the table, get up and leave. That's what I'm stating. That's what I'm stating. And I think that's what we need to actually do. They just think they have the black vote. They don't even count on the black vote. They're like, yeah, I know about 85, 90% of them are going to vote. So let's focus more on Asians. Let's focus more on Hispanics. Let's focus more on Asians. Let's focus more on Hispanics. But this needs to be the model of black communities for them to step out. This.
And blatant disregard for the safety and overall quality of life of black residents, as many of these migrants have been dumped in our neighborhoods without a plan in place to monitor and house them long term. They have intentionally created barriers to impede participation in a decision-making process around the public school buildings we pay taxes to maintain, and that they unjustly close, and ignoring the community's plea to keep them open. Communication regarding meetings that have been held have been lackluster. We found out about the first meeting in South Shore via the mayor's Facebook page and by word of mouth through text messages and just people, because our community is this. We talk to each other, we are informed, and we talk to each other, bottom line. This engagement tactic is very poor, and it ultimately leaves working class and our elder constituents, because this area has a lot of elder constituents who are not on social media. That's not fair to them, but that was intentional, we believe.
Of course
Additionally,
it was.
They made capacity limits for the
Fair
meeting.
use, fair use.
By the second day we found out about the meeting, it was stated that the meeting was full. So people were complaining that they didn't have access to a meeting. What kind of Jim Crow stuff is this?
There you go. Enough said with that. Enough said with that. The sister spoke truth to power, as she should, standing up for her community and her neighborhood just as well as the other people in the previous video has done. But I pointed out this a while before, family, that this was all funded, okay? It states here that VP Kamala Harris and the Partnership for Central America today announced more than $950 million in new private sector commitments in response to her call to action for Northern Central America, bringing the overall total to more than $4.2 billion since May of 2021. These investments will help address the root cause of migration by creating economic opportunity in the region. What in the hell they're talking about? Creating economic opportunity within the region. You're talking about you're going to send money to South America and Mexico for them to create opportunities within their own country? But I thought these people were asylum seekers, meaning they fear persecution from the state or from their country because of information or let's just look it up. I don't want to give you guys conjecture or halfway or real way sort of definition. So let's just look it up very, very quickly. Asylum. Because you think all these people are coming over here for asylum. No. They're not. They're not coming over here for asylum. They're simply coming over here because they don't want to live in their country anymore because of opportunity, supposedly. But that's not what asylum is about. It states here that asylum, the protection granted by a nation to someone who has left their native country as a political refugee, right? Meaning that you don't coincide or agree with the politics within your country and you have been outspoken about it and you fear prosecution or death. So you're going to another country that coincides with your belief and your political views so you can be safe. So you thinking all of them don't agree with they're political refugees. Hell no, they're not. They're not political refugees. And here we go. Good old Homeland Security. It says DHS continues to prepare for the end of Title 42, announces new border enforcement measures, and additionally safe and orderly processes. Let's get into this. It states here, DHS is establishing new parole process for Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans, modeled on the successful processes for Venezuelans, Ukrainians, which combine safe, orderly, and lawful pathways to the United States, including authorization to work with significant consequence for those who fail to use those pathways. We'll also continue the process with respect to Venezuelans. So you have pathways in place for people to become legalized workers, not citizens, not naturalized, but just, authorized to work. Okay. So they can still be legal. Through the CBP One app, we are also providing a new mechanism for non-citizens to schedule appointments to present themselves at ports of entry. What? You created an app. Oh, that's right. A lot of the illegal immigrants got cell phones. That makes sense. Facilitating safe and orderly arrivals. Initially, this will be used for those seeking an exception. Listen to this. Another way out. Those seeking an exception from Title 42 public health order. Oh, yeah. Okay. So you got that going on? Okay. We're going to exempt you from Title 42, meaning that you can now come into the country. Once the Title 42 order is no longer in place, which is not anymore, CPB will be used to help ensure safe and orderly processing at ports of entry. When have they done that? When have they done that? When have they just had a process where every immigrant that's coming to this country is going through a legal process or one of the legal pathways? No, it's open free borders now. It states here that DHS is increasing and enhancing the use of expedited removal under Title 8 authorities for those who cannot be processed under Title 42 public health order. These efforts include surging personnel and resources and enrolling individuals under the asylum processing interim final rule published in March 22. It's something about this asylum word that when I read the definition, I'm not just getting. They're stating here, we're going to remove you under Title 8. We're going to make exception under Title 42. And if we can't get you in then, we're going to then enroll you under the asylum processing interim. Let me just go back and read this asylum thing one more time. Maybe there's a lot of other definitions I'm not aware of, because I could be wrong. Let's stay here. See, the process granted by a nation to someone who has left their native country as a political refugee. She applied for asylum and was granted refugee status, shelter or protection from danger. We provide asylum for those too ill to care for themselves. Okay, that is the Oxford Dictionary version. Let's go to Merriam-Webster. I just needed to define this even more so. It says place of refugee and protection giving shelter to criminals and debtors. I don't know what that's about. A place of retreat and security, okay? The protection of security afforded by an asylum, refugee protection from arrest and extradition, given especially to political refugees. So, okay, they're just giving shelter and retreat. So we have thousands and thousands of people that are feared from their lives from these other countries. So instead of these people joining the military or joining the police force, because think about it like this. Let's say if there's 1,000 criminals and the citizens, you know, the people of that neighborhood or that state or that country are fearing for their lives. If they would join the police force, they would outnumber those criminals. There's always a solution to a problem, and I know I'm throwing out a very vague one, but family. These are thousands and thousands of people from the same countries, especially Mexico. So yeah, they have all these different cartels, this, that, and the other, but I'm pretty sure that the citizens of Mexico outnumber the cartel numbers. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It states here, as a complement to these efforts and a response to the unprecedented surge in migration across the hemisphere and to reduce encounters at our border, DHS and Department of Justice intend to shortly issue a proposed rule that will, subject to public comment, incentivize the use of the new and existing lawful process available in the United States and partner nations and place certain conditions on asylum eligibility for those who fail to do so. So once again, a nothing burger. Absolutely nothing. Let's let them in and let's let them figure it out. Let these sanctuary cities figure it out. So family, here's my thing for you. If you continue to vote Democrat with nothing on the table, no reparations or direct cash payments, no laws of protection for Black people, for foundational Black Americans, if there's nothing on the table for us, then here's my opinion. I'm going to get up from the table and not vote. Once again, there was nothing on the ballot last time when Joe Biden. There was nothing on the table when Donald Trump was president. I didn't vote, which is my legal right as a citizen and the people who built this country. So how about we now flip the narrative of honoring our ancestors by exercising our right not to vote, and stop using these political slogans that Michelle Obama came out with. If you don't vote, you don't have a voice. Yes, you do. Your voice is going to speak loud and clear when you don't render your vote to the Democratic Party. When they start seeing them poll booths empty, when they start taking these surveys of who's going to vote, who's not going to vote, that's when you send a clear message to the party that has been pandering to the Black community for all so long and yielding no results, no support. They haven't came through with anything. But here's the thing, they really didn't promise anything. They kind of spoke around issues. They made every other issue in America a Black person's issue, which is not ours. They gave protections against the law, protections of the law for Asian Americans. They gave protections with the law with the LGBT community. They gave money. They gave billions of dollars to support the anti-Asian hate crime bill. They gave millions of dollars for this one, for the LGBTQ, and they gave millions and billions of dollars to the Native American community in forms of reparations. And that's each and every year. If I'm lying, I'm flying. But anyway, family, you guys have a great and beautiful day, and I'll speak with you guys on the next one. I'm out.